He sat there, in the middle of the grand courtroom, expression cold as ice, dark sunglasses resting on his nose. His collar was crisp. His posture screamed authority, like he owned the power of life and death. But what he didn't know today, that arrogance would be the blade that slashed the very legacy he built. Judge Raymond Slater, a man who had ruled over 3,000 cases, whose verdicts had made seasoned attorneys break down, known to the media as the Iron Gavel. And sitting across from him was a woman, calm eyes. A spotlight gently touched her sharp, composed face. Her name was Cassidy Brooks, former federal prosecutor, now a defense attorney for the accused. Cassidy once served the system. She once believed in justice, until she nearly lost everything because of one wrongful conviction that Judge Slater himself ignored. Today, she wasn't back for revenge. She came to do what the legal system had always feared: expose a man who wore justice like a mask. That morning, the courtroom was packed, not just because the case was big, but because the hearing was being broadcast live on national television. The lights, the cameras, the tight rows of seats. Everyone was waiting for a legal showdown that could shake the system. Slater opened with a mocking tone. "I hope you didn't bring a TV script this time. We're here to rule on law, not film an episode." His words echoed through the mic. They were meant to bruise, to humiliate. But Cassidy didn't flinch. She just smiled, opened her case file, and spoke, her voice warm but firm. "Your Honor, we move to dismiss the charges, and we're prepared to submit evidence proving my client's innocence." Slater cut in. "You planning to teach me the law? I've been on this bench since before you knew how to file a motion." The room fell briefly silent. A few chuckles, but most people just looked down. Not out of agreement, but out of fear. Cassidy stood firm. She continued, detail by detail, day by day, fact by fact. But every time she gained ground, Slater interrupted, dismissed her, mocked her, undermined her, and he did it again and again. Every 5 minutes, at the back of the courtroom, a man in a gray suit sat quietly, watching Cassidy, never looking away. Around his neck hung a badge. FBI. His name was Marcus Rivera, federal agent with the Bureau's Anti-Corruption Task Force. He wasn't there to follow the case. He was there to watch the judge. Judge Slater had no idea. But Cassidy did. She had studied every look, every breath in that courtroom. She'd spent 6 months preparing all for this moment, a moment that America would remember, the moment the man who held the gavel would be judged by the very justice he once silenced. As Slater leaned back, smug, Cassidy stepped forward. "I request permission to submit new evidence," she said, her voice steady, her eyes sharp as a blade. Slater frowned. "Trying to stretch out your airtime, counselor." Cassidy placed a thick file on the bench. "We submit this to the court record," she said, "documented violations of judicial ethics directly involving the presiding judge." The courtroom went still. Only the soft tapping of reporters' keyboards and the quiet turning of pages could be heard. Slater jumped to his feet. "What do you think you're doing? This is outrageous." Cassidy didn't blink. "Your Honor, I cite Title 28, Section 455. A judge must recuse himself when impartiality is reasonably questioned. Our evidence raises more than enough questions." And then the courtroom doors swung open. 2 federal marshals entered. Behind them, Agent Rivera. The air was sucked from the room. The cameras kept rolling. The lights stayed on. And justice finally began to rise. Slater gripped the armrest tightly. His eyes darted across the room. Every gaze locked on him. No one said a word. Only the cameras kept rolling, and the sound of frantic typing echoed. Agent Rivera stepped forward. He didn't need an introduction. Everyone knew he was federal. Cassidy took a slight step aside. She let Rivera speak. Your Honor, over the past 8 months, we've collected evidence of legal misconduct involving several individuals within the judicial system, including the presiding judge of this courtroom. The room buzzed. Whispers spread like wildfire, but no one dared to move. Everyone knew something massive was unfolding. Slater growled, "This is overreach. I won't allow this intrusion. Agent, I order you to leave this courtroom." Rivera didn't flinch. He laid a thick file on the bench. These are certified materials, including recordings, bank transactions, internal emails, and sworn testimonies, all approved by the federal court. Cassidy opened a monitor. A recorded audio began to play. There was no mistaking it. Slater's voice. "I want to make sure he doesn't walk free. The company needs to keep the contract. After that, the money goes into the usual account." The room went silent. Slater stood frozen. His throat clenched. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The gavel in his hand no longer felt like power. Cassidy stepped up. "Your Honor, the defendant today is a former energy engineer accused of leaking proprietary information. But in truth, he is the scapegoat in a much larger scheme." Slater cut in. "You're trying to clear your client. By slandering the bench, you should be ashamed of your profession." Cassidy didn't react. She simply placed another file on the desk. Inside were bank statements, clear records showing 17 separate transfers over 4 years from the same corporation behind today's lawsuit. Rivera clarified. "We had financial surveillance authorization. There's evidence that the judge used a shell company to launder payments from a third party. We also obtained internal emails arranging for rulings to be influenced per corporate request." Some people gasped. Others covered their mouths. A female reporter wiped away tears, not from sorrow, but from sheer shock. Slater tried to keep his cool, but his trembling hands gave him away. His voice no longer carried strength. I don't know anything about those payments. Someone must have set me up." Cassidy said nothing. She played the next recording. Slater's voice again. This time, he was talking about Cassidy. "That little girl thinks she's clever. But if she crosses me, she'll get crushed." The courtroom erupted. Camera flashes exploded. Lenses zoomed in on Cassidy. She stood tall, composed, eyes locked forward. Rivera turned to the judge. "Judge Raymond Slater, we have an active investigation. You are hereby requested to step down immediately and cooperate with federal authorities. Otherwise, we will proceed with formal arrest." Slater swallowed hard. I need to call my lawyer." Cassidy spoke softly. "You should have called yesterday." 2 security officers approached. Slater stepped back, but there was nowhere left to go. They cuffed him, right there in open court, before hundreds of eyes, while the nation watched live. That moment, no one in the courtroom would ever forget. The man once seen as the face of justice, now led away like a criminal. Cassidy returned to the table. She gathered her files. A young female reporter approached, voice trembling. When did you know?" Cassidy answered with one line, "Since the day he humiliated me." Not because I was weak, but because he thought no one would dare to fight back. Rivera gave her a respectful nod. "Strength," he said, "isn't in what we say, it's how we stand when the storm hits." Across the country, nearly 2 million viewers were watching live. The number was still climbing. The story exploded across social media. Judge Slater arrested. Justice rises. Cassidy stood tall, but Cassidy didn't celebrate. She left the courthouse in silence. No press conferences, no interviews. She paused at the doors, looked up at the sky, where the sunlight broke through the clouds, like the faith she thought she'd lost, finally finding its way back. A week after the explosive hearing, Raymond Slater's name filled every headline, not as a respected judge, but as a man charged with abuse of power, corruption, and gross judicial misconduct. Cassidy Brooks became a national name. From television anchors to law students in packed lecture halls, everyone was talking about her. But Cassidy avoided the spotlight. No interviews, no press tours. She simply kept working, arriving on time, staying late, studying case files deep into the night. One quiet Monday morning, she received a handwritten letter. No return address. The ink was careful, the paper slightly yellowed. She opened it slowly and read, "Cassidy, I followed what happened last week. I'm one of the people wrongfully convicted under Judge Slater. Back then, I had no evidence. No one stood up for me. But watching you speak in court, I cried, not out of anger, but because finally someone had the courage to speak the truth. Thank you for not staying silent. Joseph Lang." Cassidy folded the letter, placed it gently on her desk. She didn't say a word, but her eyes turned red, because for the first time in years she knew it hadn't all been for nothing. The very next day, she was summoned to a closed-door federal hearing, not as an attorney, but as a witness in a sweeping investigation of Slater's past rulings. She stepped into the quiet chamber. 5 federal monitors sat before her. On the screen, a list of 28 cases, all ruled by Slater, all showing signs of serious irregularities. One of the monitors asked, "Are you ready for this, Ms. Brooks? It'll be long. It may take months, maybe more." Cassidy met his eyes and answered calmly, "If I don't do it, who will?" And so the investigation began. Cassidy, now joined by a federal legal team, reviewed every judgment, every transcript, every bank transfer, every witness left off the record. What they uncovered was worse than expected. One defendant had been harshly sentenced for refusing to pay a bribe. Another was wrongfully convicted because Slater had personal ties to the plaintiff's family. They even found other judges under Slater's influence, some who stayed silent out of fear, others who simply benefited from it. Cassidy documented it all, with pen, with voice memos, with unshakable conviction. Each night, she returned to her old habit, sitting by the window, opening her notebook and writing. Today, I didn't fall apart. Today, I found an old case file. Today, I saw a victim smile. That alone is enough to keep going. A month later, the FBI held a press conference, officially announcing that Raymond Slater had been indicted on 7 criminal charges. He now faced up to 35 years in federal prison. The nation erupted. Some people cheered. Some were stunned. But one thing was clear. Justice had been awakened. Meanwhile, Cassidy received a phone call. It was from a prestigious law school in Boston, They wanted her to teach legal ethics and the courage it takes to defend the truth. For the first time in years, Cassidy said yes. That evening, she returned to her office, turned off the lights, cleared her desk, slipped Joseph Lang's letter into her bag. Then she paused, looking around the room, where she had once nearly broken down. Now, it was the place where her new chapter began. On the wall hung a black and white photo, a still shot of her standing tall in court facing Slater, her eyes steady, her face lit by courtroom lights. Cassidy took a breath and softly whispered to herself, "Justice doesn't come from a robe or a title. It comes from those who choose to rise. Even when their hands shake, they don't step back." Her first class in Boston wasn't held in a lecture hall. It was in the main auditorium. Over 300 law students sat in complete silence, all staring at one name, Cassidy Brooks. She stepped onto the stage. No slides, no notes, just a microphone and unwavering eyes. She began with a question. "How many of you here believe the law is always just?" Dozens of hands went up. Cassidy nodded. "I used to believe that too, until I saw it being twisted by someone powerful, with no one brave enough to stop it." Not a single sound in the hall. Hundreds of students leaned in. Cassidy shared how it felt to be humiliated in court, how terrifying it was to be looked at like garbage by someone in a robe. Then she spoke of why she came back. Not for revenge, but because she needed to know if justice still existed at all. She said justice isn't an ideal. It's a decision, a daily choice. To stand with those who have no voice, even if it breaks you. After that lecture, many students came up to her, not to ask for advice, just to say one thing: "Thank you for doing what no one else would." That night, back in her hotel room, Cassidy opened her laptop. A new email from a familiar name, Joseph Lang. "Cassidy, they've reviewed my case, and finally my conviction has been overturned. I'm no longer a criminal. I'm free. Thank you for giving me back my name." Cassidy leaned back in her chair, eyes welling up, not from pity, but from knowing the truth. When returned to its rightful place has weight. The next week, she returned to Phoenix, not to teach, but to witness a retrial. A middle-aged man was sitting in court. He had served 10 years for a crime he didn't commit under one of Slater's rulings. Cassidy wasn't his lawyer. She sat quietly in the back row, watching as he stood holding new evidence, reading with a trembling voice. "For 8 years, I said I was innocent, and no one listened. But today, for the first time, someone finally did." The new judge sat still, then lifted the gavel and declared, "Not guilty. The conviction is vacated." The man broke into tears. He turned around, his eyes meeting Cassidy's. No words were needed. She simply nodded. A single nod that said more than 1,000 lines ever could. After the hearing, Cassidy walked alone, along an old path that once led her to court. Memories flooded back. The fear, the doubt, the nights she almost quit. But now, each step felt lighter, like something heavy had finally been let go. She understood. Truth doesn't always win quickly, but if you're patient, it will speak. At the right time, in the right place. She looked up. The evening sky was golden. Leaves drifted past her shoulder. The smallest things can become the roots of the greatest change. Cassidy smiled, then walked back to her law office. For the first time in years, not to fight, But to begin a brand new chapter. Cassidy returned to her office. Same space, same walls, same desk. But something had changed. Not the furniture, not the lighting. It was her. She sat down, opened the old drawer, pulled out a folded note, written in blue ink, faded but still legible. Don't stay silent, not even once. She had written it the day she was publicly humiliated. It used to be the only thing keeping her from giving up. Just then, her phone rang. An unknown number. Cassidy hesitated, then picked up a man's voice, low and deliberate. This is William Price, Deputy Director of Judicial Oversight. We need to meet. It's urgent. Cassidy paused. His tone wasn't an invitation. It was a warning. The meeting happened the next day. At the District Oversight Office, just 3 people, Cassidy William Price, and a gray-haired woman named Margaret Lane, former Chief Judge of the Appeals Court. William opened a folder, pushed it toward Cassidy. You know, Slater's case was only the tip of the iceberg. We found 6 more judges with suspicious financial links. 2 of them were directly involved in rulings you lost. Cassidy clenched her fists. Not surprised, just hurt. She had believed she was simply unlucky. Turns out she'd been targeted. Margaret looked her in the eye. They're already covering their tracks. One fled to Belize. Another is faking mental illness. And tragically, one key witness disappeared just yesterday. Cassidy took a deep breath. What do you need from me? William paused, then said, We want you to lead an independent special task force, to work with the FBI, to re-examine every suspicious case. Cassidy didn't answer right away. The weight was enormous, but in her heart, a question rose. If not me, then who? She nodded. I'll do it. 2 weeks later, the task force was born. Its official name, Judicial Ethics Review Unit. 12 members. All of them had once been wronged by the system. Their first task, reopen 42 case files. 11 of them had been dismissed without clear reason. The public was stunned. How could this go unseen for years? Cassidy held her first press briefing. Broadcast, live nationwide. She stood calmly, surrounded by microphones. Every camera pointed at her. I'm not here for revenge. I'm not here to shame anyone. I'm here for one thing only, to restore justice to those who were robbed of their right to be heard. 1 minute of silence. Then thunderous applause, not because she was famous, but because she spoke for the silenced. That evening, Cassidy sat in her new office. Not fancy, not large, but bright enough and quiet enough to hear her own heartbeat. Her phone rang. Joseph, the man who once sent her a handwritten letter. You remember what I said, right? Thank you. Today, my daughter got her first college scholarship. Because my record was cleared, no school will turn her away because of my name. Cassidy smiled. Her voice cracked. I remember, and I always will. The call ended, but the feeling stayed. A new fire lit inside her, not just to fix the damage, but to rebuild the foundation. That night, she opened her old notebook and wrote one more line. Today I didn't win. I just got started, and I won't stop. 1 year after Slater's arrest, Cassidy stood outside a towering building, the symbol of federal justice. A place that once made her cry in silence. Today, it was the place where she would speak. Inside the auditorium, hundreds had gathered. Young judges, law students, wrongfully convicted individuals, and victims who had stayed silent for years. Cassidy walked to the podium. No papers, no lapel mic, just one person speaking to the rest. She began slowly. I used to believe in silence. I used to think if I kept my head down, the truth would eventually shine through. I was wrong. The hall fell absolutely still. She continued, "Truth has no legs. It doesn't walk on its own. It needs someone to carry it forward. And often that person will be knocked down, dismissed, discredited." She paused, looking toward the back of the room, where Joseph Lang sat beside his daughter. The young girl waved. Cassidy nodded gently. Then she said, "But if no one rises, then the cycle continues. The innocent keep paying the price. And justice becomes just a hollow mask." Cassidy reached into her jacket, pulled out a worn piece of paper. The ink had faded, but the words remained. "Don't stay silent, not even once. I wrote this," she said, "when I felt I had nothing left to hold on to. It saved me. And today, I hope it saves someone else." Sitting here, the room stood, not in loud applause, but in quiet reverence. A silence that meant respect. For a woman who kept her word, at the cost of her reputation, her career, and her peace. After the talk, Cassidy walked into the hallway. A young law student rushed up behind her. "Ms. Brooks, I just got rejected from a firm because I refused to alter a case file. But I don't regret it, because after hearing you today, I know I wasn't wrong." Cassidy rested a hand on his shoulder. "You weren't wrong. You're just a little alone right now. But that won't last." She turned away. The evening sky burned a deep orange. A breeze passed through her hair. She inhaled slowly. The air today was nothing like the day she once left court in shame. Today, she walked in light. The light of someone who chose the right side, even when it meant walking alone. Even when it meant being knocked down. Cassidy never called herself a hero. She was just a woman who knew what pain was, who knew how to fall, and still chose not to turn away from the truth. She crossed the street. Her footsteps echoed firm and even. Each step, a quiet declaration. Justice isn't a vague concept. It's what we do every single day. And if one day you find yourself staring at injustice, remember Cassidy's story. And know this: justice doesn't arrive on its own. It needs someone brave enough to stand up for it. Ditamamai. Life isn't always fair. But silence in the face of injustice is what lets it survive. Speak up, even if just once. Be brave, even if just once. And if you think you're too small to matter, remember, one woman, one piece of paper, one voice at the right moment changed an entire system.